Hello, everyone. I'm Laurie Hutcheson, Executive Director of the Lobular Breast Cancer Alliance, and I'm happy to welcome everyone to this interview with our new Scientific Advisory Board member, Dr. Mo Rimawi. Dr. Rimawi, I'm so excited you've joined the LBCA Scientific Advisory Board. Welcome.
Thank you, Laurie, and thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be on this board and feel privileged and honored to serve on it.
Wonderful. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. I'm going to ask a bit about your background and how you became interested in lobular breast cancer research, and about what led you to agree to join our scientific advisory board. So can you start with a little bit about your educational background?
Yes, thank you. So I went to medical school in the University of Jordan, in Amman, Jordan, where I was born and raised, and came to the United States in 1998 for residency in internal medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. And there I stayed on for fellowship after news was announced that Dr. Kent Osborne and the breast cancer group was moving from San Antonio to Baylor and trained under the direction of Dr. Osborne and Dr. Elledge. I trained in Dr. Osborne's lab with him and Rachel Schiff for several years, and then I was recruited to faculty as a translational clinical trialist. And so what I do is interacting with lab scientists and helping them translate scientific discovery from cell lines and preclinical models like animals into essentially new treatments in patients.
That's getting into one of my next questions was about any specific specialty in your work, either as a medical oncologist or researcher or both.
So the majority of the work that I have done was around understanding the biology and the signaling and the targeting of two major pathways in breast cancer. One is HER2, which is where I've done a lot of work on, and that, as you know, is amplified or overexpressed in about 15, maybe 20% of breast cancer. And of course, the estrogen receptor, which is, the majority of patients, maybe 70% or so, and particularly important in lobular breast cancer. And I also worked on the connection or the crosstalk between these two major pathways and how we can target both for better efficacy. So that really demonstrated our ability to target biologic pathways, and in many instances without the need for chemotherapy in many of these patients, or at least that's the goal. And then also established maybe the platform or the model of how do we identify the pathways that drive a specific breast tumor or any tumor, and then have a biologically rational combination of agents given where hopefully we can have a tailored or targeted treatment that is optimized to the individual patient and the individual tumor rather than kind of a less specific approach.
That's precision medicine, right?
Exactly.
So, in this work that you've been doing, can you share a little how your thinking has evolved about lobular breast cancer tumors?
Yes. One of this is a very interesting question. And it's one that I thought about as I was, looking at your generous invitation to join the board. One of the advantages of being a physician researcher is that we get to basically have observations in clinic and, think about them in the lab, and vice versa, see observations or discoveries in the lab and try to move them to the clinic. So my interest or thinking about lobular breast cancer started for me in the clinic. I observed how in my own individual patients, how unique this type of breast cancer is. Initially, in the older days of breast imaging, before digital mammography and before 3D mammography and tomosynthesis, this was kind of the stealth tumor. This is a tumor that's more likely to hide. and not be detected radiographically. Now better with better imaging, but still, still more challenging than other types of breast cancer. So that was one element. The other element is really the unique clinical behavior for lobular breast cancers. In the way they present, in the way they respond to neoadjuvant treatment or not respond, in the way that, we always think of lobular breast cancer, it's more than what meets the eye. So you think on imaging that it's a certain amount of tumor, and then the surgeon goes in and they find more than what was expected or different findings. To really in patients who are living with a metastatic lobular cancer, essentially the metastatic pattern, how it also appears, how sometimes you even find it, unexpectedly. A patient undergoes a bilateral oophorectomy, salpingo oophorectomy, for reasons that are not related to cancer, and then they find metastatic deposits. That's usually lobular, the infiltration of that. And then you started thinking, okay, well, what are the clinical trials doing? You look at it and you find that lobular cancers are with other ER positive breast cancers. And that really then doesn't really give us a lot of power to detect what is the pattern for it. Meta-analysis and retrospective analysis did really tell us more about it. It's, less likely to respond or benefit from traditional chemotherapy, that it has, the different metastatic pattern that we talked about. And I think, we have to go, I'm a big believer in biology. To understand all these things that I just, mentioned, we have to understand the biology and, the unique biology. Lobular breast cancer has kind of an overarching biologic finding, the loss of E cadherin, or loss or dysfunction, we now know, of E cadherin, and the different ways this could happen. And this is, a biologic hallmark for the disease. It doesn't define the whole disease, but it defines the disease, but it doesn't really tell us everything about it. And so I think from that, even through the clinical trials that I do, as an investigator-initiated studies or the national studies that we lead, started thinking we need to think of lobular cancer not as a subset of breast cancer, but as an individual clinical subtype that needs to be studied and understood in a way that is unique and distinctive. And one more statement related to this, I think, lobular breast cancer is about 8%, maybe 10% of breast cancer. The numbers vary a little bit. But I think this is what we need. This approach in lobular breast cancer is the approach we have to follow across breast cancer. We have to subdivide breast cancer into further and further subgroups defined by biologic pathways or other hallmarks that could help us identify these tumors and study them in trying to fulfill or deliver on the promise of precision medicine you just mentioned before. And so this is kind of how my thinking evolved related to lobular breast cancer, and why I thought it would be a great opportunity to join the great minds on that board, and everyone, the physicians, the scientists, the advocates or the survivors and the patients, all of us coming together and thinking, how can we make a difference in this field?
Fantastic. So I want to just clarify for our listening audience, viewing audience, we've launched a movement to claim October 15th as Global Lobular Breast Cancer Awareness Day for the 15% of breast cancers diagnosed as lobular breast cancer. And that data, I should say, includes about 5% that are mixed lobular and no non-lobular.
Yes.
So adding
Yes.
to 10% that you mentioned earlier. So I think that people agree it's 15% when you include mixed. I had a question about, just taking it a little further. I completely agree lobular needs to be focused on specifically, but is there a particular area in lobular research that you think, is the place to go next or most importantly?
Laurie, I actually think I want to basically say that next is what you just mentioned. what is lobular breast cancer? I think we start there. And you mentioned, yeah, the number I cited, 8 to 10, is kind of the pure lobular. If you say a lobular component, then you go up to the 15%. And the question is, what do we define? Is any element of cancer, for example, considered lobular or not? And it is really whatever we agree to that, of course, makes sense, because one could argue that even if you have a component of a lobular, that that if you treat the way you treat the rest of breast cancer, what we call ductal or non-specific, no special type, then you might be able, those treatments may work for that component, but not the lobular component, and then that becomes the issue that the patient or the disease or that the patient has to contend with. Another thing, are there subclones that we cannot even clinically detect? So I think the first thing is to look at where and how we diagnose lobular breast cancer. There's really some, exciting work about using, artificial intelligence to try and maybe identify if there's a component of that. Of course, more advanced genomic profiling that looks at things that the current more standard way of profiling tumors may miss, to try and really identify really whatever component, lobular component there is in a tumor, and then from there try and see, do they have a unique, do they share the same clinical behavior? Do they, how do they pose a challenge in management, and where do we go from there? I think we start there, and then after we start there, I think our job becomes to subdivide lobular breast cancer into essentially maybe the different components of how do the different components within lobular matter. But then, like we started saying, it could be that a hallmark of lobular breast cancer is the loss or dysfunction of E-cadherin, but it doesn't really tell us everything about the disease. How about, some of the studies are ongoing or planned, how about, HER2 mutations? How about, the ESR1 mutations? How about maybe other unique mutations that this tumor has? So I think it's more and more into defining and learning more about the biology. And then as we learn from biology, the wonderful thing is we identify immediately therapeutic opportunities that, could be targeted with drugs that either exist or would be hopefully designed specifically for these tumors.
Yeah. Related to that, is there anything specifically new on the horizon that you're excited about?
So maybe a couple of things. I think one is the work related to first of all, I think the more advanced, deeper molecular analysis of tumors, ones that could identify even the smallest of subclones or the rarest of mutation. I think that is really a very important discovery that could help us further understand the disease. I think I mentioned also about the use of artificial intelligence. I think that is absolutely amazing work that is being done, and that actually could help us better identify this disease. And of course, we're starting to see through maybe helping on review panels or study sections or stuff, grants that are coming in with either clinical trials or projects are specific to either patients with lobular cancer in the clinical trial aspect, or models that are specific to lobular cancer in the lab, in seeing more and more of that. So that trend is very heartening to me. And what's also heartening is that on the review panels, many of us, a lot of us are saying, pointing out the uniqueness and trying to study this disease and develop models for it. So there are, more work on preclinical models, more work on developing specific clinical trials targeting lobular cancer, and of course, more work related to artificial intelligence and further and molecular analysis that further characterize this disease.
So, can you talk a little bit about your use or work with patient advocates in your research?
Yeah, I could talk about that for a long time. I think that patient advocates are honestly the most spectacular group of people one can hope to work with. And I think they self-select, right? They're so first of all, they have either through them or people they love, or even caring in the community, they have personal stories that attaches them to cancer. Again, some of them personal stories, some of them family stories, and some of them a neighbor, a friend, or even just reading about something or working in an organization. So they really have that personal story that gives people, gets people out of bed in the morning and moving forward. They also have a tremendous amount of energy. And so really anytime that any of us feels a little exhausted, a little overwhelmed, you just get together with an advocate, through a meeting that is designed for something else. And you're like, whoa, that energized me. And then the very, and of course their ability to like sit and you're like, did I explain that well? And then they ask you the most significant question that maybe none of the scientists or the physicians on the call asked. So I think that's really important. And I think the very important part of their work is how they ground us, is how they keep us oriented and targeted. Sometimes in academic discussions, people could get carried away with very interesting academic concepts. And then, invariably a patient advocate says, how does that help the patients? And you're like, oh, okay, now let's kind of get down back to reality, back to the path of delivering for our patients. On a personal level, they've helped me really grow, professionally and, academically. I think having to essentially appear before and not in a bad way, but like appear before, like, how am I going to explain this to the advocates? How am I going to say why I designed the study this way? How is this helping the patients? So that's very important. And then also how you communicate your ideas to someone outside the academic circle, maybe. Although a lot of advocates are, academicians in of themselves, and most or all of them are very successful folks. So I'm not really saying anything other than they're outside the immediate area of expertise a lot of the times. But then you talk to them and then you say, okay, I have to be able to deliver my ideas. I have to be able to explain my ideas. And, it helps because I find it easier for me to understand my own ideas when I have to explain them to someone else. And it helps me also kind of like as if I'm rotating them and I'm looking at what is not fleshed out, what is, imperfect. And of course, then they also sometimes hold that idea to you and they spin it and you kind of see where you missed that. So it's been very helpful to me, personally, and to the teams that we're working with. We've had them on our breast spore grant, of course, which is, academically where I, grew up and, having received my first grant was a spore supplement. I received a career development award from the spore, and then working with the advocates helped me a lot. And then through our multiple, multi-project grants and Department of Defense grants and stuff, the involvement of the advocates, and then of course serving with them on program committees and review panels. It has just been very rewarding to me, and I consider them invaluable, honestly, in the work ahead. It's a partnership. Of course, you all also raise awareness, help the community, pay attention, lobby, our political establishment and our legislatures and Congress to pay attention and hopefully fund those important issues. So I couldn't say enough good things about the advocates and how they've helped me, how they've helped our program, how they've helped the entire community. And I think, honestly, everyone who's affected with breast cancer across the world, because if it weren't for that advocacy, in many aspects, we wouldn't be where we are today with the treatment options.
Well, I love all that, and I appreciate your saying it. One of the things our organization is continually trying to do is promote, to help people who are interested become patient advocates and feel comfortable approaching their clinicians, the clinician researchers. And it's often, a fear that they're not going to be listened to, or that interaction will be shunned. So it's just so great to hear this. It's very reassuring. And, we're always trying to encourage people. Yeah, you can reach out to researchers. Everyone on our scientific advisory board is happy to give a tour of their lab, of their research. And, we have these local advocacy teams now forming who can actually go to our scientists and reach out to them. So thank you for all that you said, and it just helps promote this. And we are also sending patient advocates for training in basic science and breast cancer, when we are able. So thank you for working with us. So related to that, do you have any message for the lobular breast cancer patient community about your hopes for your work with us?
I always say to the community generally, which are first and foremost our patients, and of course our colleagues, whether in healthcare or in science, and everywhere in between, that are helping kind of advance care for cancer in general, for breast cancer specific, and most specifically lobular. I applaud the work that the lobular breast cancer community is doing. It remains not to be an easy task. Essentially say that we're going to take what people just considered a variation on breast cancer, I don't want to say garden variety, but a common breast cancer, and say, no, this is unique, this is different. I think it kind of validating, consolidating, crystallizing many clinical observations that many of us have seen, and maybe also some findings in clinical trials. And then really saying we're going to, need to call this a specific subtype, and we're going to need to study it, and we're going to need to move it forward. This is, work of pioneers, trailblazers, and this is what's happening right now. More awareness is needed, but people are more aware of lobular now than they were even a couple of years ago, or 5 years ago. And then, also, there's, again, as I mentioned, I've seen a changing of the tides, if you will. More people interested in working in lobular, more people interested in doing clinical trials in lobular, and more funding agencies acknowledging the importance. Now, I would love it if we have actually specific funding mechanisms, but at least people are acknowledging the uniqueness and the importance of doing research in this type of tumor, on review panels and so on. And the hope is that this work continues, that this work evolves, that it takes off, and essentially takes a life of its own, which I think to a large extent it has. And so I would say, I'm honored to join that community. I look forward to thinking with them, talking to them, and working with them, and hopefully, help all of us together bring in a day where we don't have to say any more goodbyes to patients with any cancer, but specifically in this instance, lobular cancer. Help the patients who have it live longer and healthier lives, and then also maybe one day just eliminate it altogether. Wouldn't that be great? And I think we have to have big goals, lofty as they may sound sometimes, because it's those people who had big goals, who are called, dreamers, are the people who change the world. And I think this community has the potential to have that impact.
Yes, thank you. We do. And that's the vision of our organization. So we realize, because 15%, while it's a large number of breast cancers in any one site, it's often small for a study. And so we've always promoted collaboration among scientists. We've offered our own grants, in our small way to promote more lobular research. But we also encourage our scientific advisory board members to meet one another, to collaborate, and particularly around implementing clinical trial studies. So I'm wondering whether you are in the process of collaborating currently with any of our scientific advisory board members, or have anything that you're hoping to do that you could share?
Yeah, so actually, so I 100% agree with what you said. I think that we need collaboration. If it weren't for collaboration, um, we wouldn't be where we are today in any tumor type. In lobular, I think that, and I think increasingly, um, increasingly with many subtypes, and even in the what we consider common cancers like breast, is really we're subdividing them into such smaller groups where we have to come together. We have to do clinical trials together. No institution, no matter how large, no research program, no matter how well funded, can do it on its own, because the amount of expertise that we need are tremendous. We need, clinical expertise in the clinic. We need, of course, lab expertise in molecular biology. We also need, genetics and genomics. We need pathology. We need also people who do informatics and bioinformatics and artificial intelligence experts and so on. So yes, I mean, there is, a lot of, so first, we have a very good, professional and friendship relationships with many people on the board. Dr. Jason Moabi, the chair, he was here with us at Baylor for a period before he joined our friends at MD Anderson, and he's a good friend and collaborator. Dr. Renat Jesselson, who was also here at Baylor and has been a long-term collaborator with our group. Dr. Fraser Pareja, who's, I mentioned a lot of her work related to the artificial intelligence and diagnosis, does ground breaking work. And we also, hosted her as a guest, a few months ago and discussing collaborations. So we are, hopefully working to fulfill that, the vision you have, which is let's get together. And I'm a big believer in that. I would say if people sit together who are like-minded, who have similar goals, who have complementary expertise, then all you have to do is just put people together in a room and just let's discuss that. And then collaboration ideas naturally and organically evolve from those discussions. And through my service on the board, I hope to do that. Of course, one of the people who are, will remain integral and fundamental in the field of lobular breast cancer, but also was on the board for a while. Dr. Steffi Oostenrijk, of course, is a dear friend and a collaborator. And so we really have that community coming together, being, kind of woven together into a network of collaboration. And again, my goal is to continue to do that, further it, and hopefully be able, together with the colleagues, help make a difference in this field.
Wonderful, thank you. We hope you'll think about doing something on October 15th for our Global Lobular Breast Cancer Awareness Day, and I can follow up with you about that. I have some ideas for you. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we end our meeting with you?
And first of all, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to serve on the board and for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I'm excited about joining the organization. I'm excited about the work ahead, and I'm inspired by the work that you all have done. And hopefully, we'll be able to contribute to it and do meaningful work.
Thank you so much for a really interesting conversation. It's wonderful to have you with us, and I look forward to all the work we're going to do together in the future.
Thank you, Laurie.